So as he began traveling towards South India, one of the places he stopped was Kurmastan, and a place of the pastimes of Kurma. And there was a Kurma Brahmana. I don't know if that was his name or they just call him that because that's where he was from. But that Kurma Brahmana was, as so many people were overwhelmed to see Mahaprabhu and to hear the chanting and so inspired. And he invited Mahaprabhu to his home and he revealed his heart that, now that I've seen you, I just cannot tolerate the waves of misery caused by material life. And, he was just so inspired by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that he just wanted to leave everything and he wanted to leave home and he wanted to follow along with him. And so many people did want to do that, wouldn't you? And this was a frequent occurrence. So how did Mahaprabhu deal with that? So his instruction was that it's better to remain at home. In many cases he said this. And not just remain at home, but chant the holy name, preach, and instruct Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Become a spiritual master and liberate everyone. If you do this, your material life at home will not obstruct your spiritual advancement, and you will never lose my company. So that's beautiful. And, we can take away that, often it's best to encourage people to practice from home, but not just practice at home, become teachers. Because when you become a teacher, it's very different than just practicing. It's important. And then as he said, I will never leave you. You're following my instructions, you're doing what I said, and you will have my company. So that's inspiring. And in this same town, there was a Brahmin named Vasudev who had leprosy. And he was a self-realized soul because he actually had worms on his body and he would pick them up and put them back on when they fell off. He was their food. And pretty advanced. So that Vasudev leper, he saw Mahaprabhu and he had seen him chanting, and so he came. He was so eager, he was dying to see him, and he rushed to the Kurma Brahmana's house, and Mahaprabhu had just left. He was gone. And he was so heartbroken and just devastated. But then, in a moment, suddenly, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came back. He just returned. And he embraced him. And when he embraced him, his distress and his disease, his body was completely cured. And he got a name for that, Lord Caitanya, that means the one that cured the leper. I can't remember what the name is. But this is an extraordinary magical pastime of the potency of Mahaprabhu. And that Vasudev was such a sweet devotee that he was worried that maybe I'm going to become proud because this wonderful thing happened to me, this miracle. And Lord Chaitanya told him, no, he said, just if you chant constantly and you preach, you won't become proud. So that was the instruction. We can take away that, first of all, Lord Chaitanya will be there when we need him, if we're sincere. That's a big if there. If we're sincere, we can just try to be sincere. And sometimes we may give material and spiritual help. We're not indifferent to people's suffering conditions. Obviously we can't cure people by embracing them, but it's said that Murari Gupta, he would cure people's material and spiritual disease, So, we should always show compassion. So then Mahaprabhu continued on, traveling further south to the banks of the Godavari, where he met Ramananda Roy. And Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya had told him, that he should meet with him. And Ramananda Roy was a very important person. He was the governor, the viceroy of Rajmahendri, which was the state capital. And he was a great statesman of the time, influential person. And he was also a poet and a scholar and an extraordinary devotee who would become one of the most intimate associates of Mahaprabhu. So then with Ramananda Roy, this is also a very, very important discussion that went on. We're just skimming through these things. It was a phenomenal discussion that took place. But it was quite unusual. We'll just take note of a few things. What was quite unusual is that, technically Ramananda Roy was a Sudra. He was a householder. Yet Caitanya Mahaprabhu didn't preach to him. Instead, he sat with Ramananda Roy and he asked him questions and he listened carefully to his answers. Interesting, very interesting. He got Ramananda Roy to say everything. He was just egging him on. No, tell me more. Tell me more. No, I think there's more. So through the mouth of Ramananda Roy, we learn so much. And of course, in this case, Mahaprabhu was again picking up another eternal associate. And he invited him to come to Puri, where he would become a very, very important part of the unfolding of Lord Chaitanya's mission. So, we can take away here that, we're never too big to listen to someone else, even if that person is so-called in a lower position. And also that when like-minded devotees come together and ask questions and listen to each other, we can help each other to go deeper and deeper into more confidential topics. So Mahaprabhu then, he continued to travel through many places of pilgrimage, Ahovalam, Tirupati, Shivakanchi, Vishnukanchi, and eventually, not sure where it was, but then he had an encounter with Buddhists. So the leader of the big Buddhist cult, he was a big scholar, and he wanted to meet Mahaprabhu to establish his 9 philosophical conclusions of Buddhism. And even though it was said that it was not really fit for discussion for Mahaprabhu, but still Caitanya Mahaprabhu spoke to them just to decrease their pride. And so in this case, in this preaching instance, he used strong logic, primarily strong logic, and he broke them to pieces just with logic. So not harsh words, but logic. So it was such a clear defeat that people started laughing, and the Buddhists, they were just felt ashamed and fearful, and they just kind of scattered. And then Prabhupada, in the purport of this, one of these verses, he says that atheists may be very expert in mental speculation and may be so-called great philosophers, but they can be defeated by a Vaishnav firmly situated in his conviction and God consciousness. And so, following in the footsteps of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, all the preachers engaged in the service of ISKCON should be very expert in putting forward strong arguments and defeating all types of atheists. This is Prabhupada's instruction to us. So the Buddhists were angry at being defeated, and so they made a plot against him. And they gave him some untouchable food, saying that it was Mahaprasadam. And then a bird swooped down and picked up the plate in his beak, and the food fell on the Buddhists, and the bird dropped the plate, and it banged on it was metal plate, and it banged on the head of the leader, and he went unconscious. Then his disciples started crying, and they ran to Mahaprabhu, and please, please, we're sorry, excuse our offenses, and bring our spiritual master back to life. I don't think he was dead, but he was unconscious. And Lord Chaitanya instructed them, you just chant the holy name of Krishna loudly in his ear, and he will regain consciousness, which he did. And he immediately began chanting the holy name. And as a comment to this, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said that the disciples, were actually initiated by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and that consequently, they actually became different persons, not Buddhists, not atheists, but Vaishnavas. And they accepted Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's order, and so because of accepting his order, their original Krishna consciousness was revived. And actually, the disciples became the spiritual master of their spiritual master. Interesting. So everyone was astonished to see this happen, but suddenly, Mahaprabhu just disappeared from everyone's sight, and no one could find him. So from this incident, we can take away that, that what Prabhupada said, we should be able to put forward strong arguments to defeat all types of atheists, and by our association, people should change. So then Mahaprabhu, he continued on to Sri Rangam. Now the south, in this area is full of Vaishnavas that worship Ram. They're followers of Ramanuja and of Madhva, the Tattvavadis. And Mahaprabhu met, and he stayed for 4 months in the house of the head priest of the Ranganath temple, Venkatabhatta. So again, he's a very important person, very well known, the head priest of this mega temple. And there is, of course, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's a very, very beautiful section where Mahaprabhu convinces Venkatabhatta of the superiority of Prema Bhakti. And in a very loving and joking way, he lightly challenges him, and he wins his hearts. So that was his strategy there. And that such an important family became followers of Mahaprabhu. It had a hugely powerful effect throughout the South. And again, Mahaprabhu was there to pick up another great associate, because Gopal Bhatta was the son of Venkatabhatta. He was a small boy at the time of maybe 9 or 10. And he instructed him while he was there, and he told him to stay at home and study, and that later he would go to Vrindavan. So you see this forward thinking. He was shaping the movement. Gopal Bhatta Goswami would play a big role to bring bhakti from south to north. He would be, by staying in Sri Rangam, he would get trained in all the rituals, all the shastras of the south, Ramanuja, Madhva, everyone. He would have all knowledge that he would need in the future in Vrindavan when he and the Goswamis would begin writing. So from this we'll take away that, preaching and converting someone, it doesn't always have to be heavy-handed. It can be lighthearted. And also that it's important that preachers get the tools and the skills that will help them in the mission, like Gopal Bhatta. He came to Vrindavan fully equipped to take part in the mission. So then Mahaprabhu traveled on, and they ran into some Bhattaharis, and they were some bogus group, and they used women to allure Mahaprabhu's servant, Krishnadas, to come into their camp. He was apparently simple and gentle devotee, and they just polluted his intelligence, so Mahaprabhu quickly went to find him. And in this case, he was very angry. And why are you keeping my Brahmin assistant? I'm in the renounced order, and you're supposed to be in it also? And you're purposefully giving me pain? What is the logic in this? And so the Bhattaharis were angry at this, and they all came running from all sides with weapons in their hands to attack Lord Caitanya. But wonderfully, the weapons fell from their hands and struck their own bodies instead, started cutting their bodies, and they all started running away in fear. And Mahaprabhu just grabbed Krishnadas by the hair and took him away. So from this one we can see, when it comes to doing harm to a servant of the Lord, we should do the needful to help. There's a time when we can be angry, and for ourselves we can tolerate so much, but for other devotees being harmed, dragged away, we respond strongly. And also we may take it, as a lesson that Maya is so strong that even if you're traveling with God himself, you can still be attacked. So, we have to always be on guard and be cautious. Srila Prabhupada used to say that our problem is that we're not fearful enough of Maya. So Mahaprabhu continued his travels, and eventually he arrived at Udupi, and where he had a confrontation with the Tattvavadis, or the followers of Madhvacharya. So he met there the chief acharya, who was very learned, and his followers also. But Mahaprabhu could understand that they were proud of their Vaishnavism. And he smiled and very humbly began discussion. And he asked him, the chief of the Tattvavadis, I do not know very well the aim of life and how to achieve it. Please tell me of the best ideal for humanity and how to attain it. And so a long discussion ensued. Again, a very important discussion to read in depth. And, but, in the end, basically, Mahaprabhu, he disagreed with their position. And he said that the highest goal of life is beyond the duties of Varnashram Dharma, and that pure devotional service is devoid of karma and jnana, and that the process of hearing and chanting is the very best means to attain loving service to Krishna. And so he told all these things with long streams of Srimad Bhagavatam verses to prove his position. I mean, just verse after verse after verse. And the Tattvavadis were struck with wonder, and they were totally humbled and ashamed even, seeing Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's rigid faith in Vaishnavism. They fully accepted what he was saying. And although Mahaprabhu pointed out the defects, he also expressed appreciation for their acceptance of the form of the Lord. And that, this is the great qualification of the Vaishnava Sampradayas. And we can note that in these encounters, especially in Sri Rangam and Udupi, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was making important alliances and connections with other Vaishnavas. He would incorporate, he would incorporate 2 essential items from each sampradaya for establishing his own mission. From Ramanuja, he would take the template of bhakti unpolluted by karma and gyan, and also service to devotees. And from Sri Madhvacharya, he would take, this complete conquest over Mayavad and service to the deity of Krishna as eternal truth. And from Sri Nambarka, he would take the need to take exclusive shelter of Srimati Radharani and Gopi Baba. And from Sri Vishnu Swami, he would take the mood of considering everything belongs to Krishna and Ragamarg. So, Mahaprabhu would incorporate these points into his Achincha Beda Beda Tattva and his expression that's taking from everyone, unifying the 4 sampradayas. And so we can take away that, to defeat, intelligent people, we have to know Shastric conversion, and that it can be done without animosity. And that there's always an attempt to unify rather than be divisive. That we can take truthful aspects of any tradition and any philosophy and embrace those aspects and highlight that. And so then Mahaprabhu moved on to the Dandakaranya forest, and there it became known as Saptatala. He just embraced 7 trees and he liberated them. And they returned to the spiritual world. And everybody saw that it happened. They were gone. And so, and also, when he was in Jarikandra, we know that he liberated the animals. So while traveling, he showed compassion to everybody. The trees, the birds, the animals, so that's a nice point to incorporate. We think of all living entities. And so then Mahaprabhu eventually, he returned to Puri, and then eventually he attempted to go to Vrindavan. But he took a detour and went to Ramakeli, where he, again, was picking up his associates. There's Rupa and Sanatan and Anupam. And so he, that is just a huge pastime that we won't go into, but you see how he's going around. He's going far and wide and picking up his people. And at the advice of Sanatana Goswami, Mahaprabhu decided not to go to Vrindavan. He went back to Puri. And then after some time again, on his way back to Puri, he stopped in Shantipur. And there, again, he met another of his associates. That was Raghunath Das Goswami. And again, he's picking up an associate. But he told him, you go back to your home. And when the time is right, you'll come to me. So then when he returned to Puri, and after some time, he again left for Vrindavan, taking 1 servant with him. And so then at Prayag, he met with Rupa Goswami. And there, these are such big and important discussions, from everything. Mahaprabhu is just downloading the whole philosophy of Krishna consciousness to Rupa Goswami. And he instructed him in all these basic principles for what would become the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. and sent him to Vrindavan, and he gave him a full outline, exactly what he wanted him to do, and he empowered him. And there's a beautiful verse. It says, by entering the heart of Rupa Goswami, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu empowered him. By entering his heart, he empowered him to ascertain properly the conclusions of all truths. He made him an experienced devotee whose decisions correctly agreed with the verdicts of the disciplic succession. Thus, Srila Rupa Goswami was personally empowered by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So now he's picked up so many associates, and he's not picking them up, but now he's giving them the full training to unfold his mission. So, we can take away that, empowerment is required. We can plan, we can have strategies, we can study, we can do so many things, but mercy is the factor that you can't do without. Empowerment, getting the mercy, and training is required. So then Mahaprabhu, he went on to Varanasi, and there he has a confrontation, which is another super important discussion to go into in great detail. We're just, skimming through things. And there he finally met up with Tapan Mishra, who'd gone there waiting and waiting. When will he come? It was years, that he was waiting. And Chandrasekhar Acharya was also there. And of course, by that time, Raghunath Bhatt was born. So then Mahaprabhu, again, he was connecting with his associates and giving association to prepare them to take part in the mission, especially Raghunath Bhatt. So then there, as we know, the Varanasi, that's the place of the Mayavadis. And, they really did nothing but blaspheme Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They said, although he's a sannyasi, he doesn't take any interest in the study of Vedanta. He's just chanting and dancing in Sankirtan, wanders around with sentimentalists. And, but he has some kind of a mystic power by which he hypnotizes people. He's a sannyasi in name only. And they had heard about Sarvabhauma. They said even Sarvabhauma became a madman in his association. So, of course, the Vaishnavas, the few Vaishnavas that were there, was just horrible to hear these things that these people were saying. But Mahaprabhu, he just smiled to himself and he ignored them. And he didn't talk with them. And he said, I came to sell my emotional, ecstatic sentiments in Kasi, but I can't find any customers. It's a heavy load. And I don't know, maybe if I just get a fraction of the price, I'll sell them here in Kasi. Meaning that even these people are not qualified, but if they just have a little inclination to chant Hare Krishna, I'm going to deliver them. And Srila Prabhupada in the purport, he said that this is his experience in New York, all these not qualified people, but they weren't offenders. And so he could give them the Hare Krishna mantra. So, few things to take away in this pastime is, dealing with criticism. Just ignore it. Don't waste time with it. And as Prabhupada said, I think in one of the purports there, that sometimes it's better, it's better not to associate, but it's better to find a favorable situation. And Srila Prabhupada gave the example that how he tried in India to spread Krishna consciousness, it just wasn't working. So he went to the West, where it was a more favorable environment for spreading Krishna consciousness. And also that, the holy name can be given freely even to unqualified people, but if they're not offensive, So then Mahaprabhu, he left, he went to Vrindavan, and then eventually he returned again to Varanasi. And on his second visit, that was when he met Sanatana Goswami, and he gave all the Sanatana Shiksha, all this amazing, for 2 months, training and empowerment, just in the same way that he did for Rupa Goswami. So you see how, philosophers, academics, they tend to think, oh, Mahaprabhu's, he was, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is just this emotional, sentimental or whatever. They don't put him in category with philosophers, but he is such a philosopher. You read these discussions and you see, so much philosophy there. And so then this time, Mahaprabhu, he stayed at the house of Chandrasekhar, and he took prasad at Tapan Mishra's. And this in itself is a statement. It's a little bit of a strategy. A sannyasi technically is not supposed to stay in the house of a Sudra. So in this case, he flaunted the rules. And, but he did take his food at Tapan Mishra's, who was a Brahmin. So in that case, he stuck with the rules. So, sometimes you do it one way or another. So then when he was meeting with the Mayavadis, this time he agreed to meet. So he goes to the place where they are, and he sits at the place where they wash their feet. And Prakasananda Saraswati is like, please come here, Your Holiness. Why are you sitting in this unclean place? What is causing your lamentation? And Prabhupada noted that, everybody wants to introduce themselves as, a very important person. But Mahaprabhu introduced himself as very humble and very meek. So, like Prakasananda was thinking, well, he must be lamenting about something, because why would he present himself like this? Mahaprabhu said, I belong to a lower order of sannyasis, and therefore I don't deserve to sit with you. But Prakasananda Saraswati was so captivated by the beauty of Mahaprabhu that he took him by the hand and seated him with great respect in the midst of the assembly. And then in this purport, Prabhupada says that actually this was a big agyata sukriti for Prakasananda Saraswati, that he was touched by the beauty, and so he gently took him. And so because of this sukriti, then he was able to get blessings further down the line. So then he asks, you're a disciple of Sri Keshava Bharati, so, you belong to our Shankar Sampradaya, then why don't you associate with us? Why do you just chant and dance with fanatics? And, meditation and study of Vedanta, these are the sole duties of a sannyasi. But, you look so brilliant, as if you're Narayan himself. In this case, it's true. And, just explain, why have you adopted this behavior of lower class people? Why? What are you doing? And all of these kind of things, they go on now. Same kind of, what are you people doing? So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, very gently, very respectfully, he gives this beautiful description of his own transformation, of how he met his spiritual master. His spiritual master considered him a fool and said, he said, I should just chant the holy name of Krishna all the time, and that's all what I should do. This Hare Krishna mantra is the essence of all mantras, or all Vedic hymns, and the only way in Kali Yuga. And so, then Mahaprabhu went on and on. He explained in detail the glories of the holy name, and that chanting is higher than Vedic study. And then he explained his own experience that, that he got so much ecstasy from chanting that he became like a madman, and it just caused him to dance and cry and laugh. And so, he explained that when I told my spiritual master what was happening, he smiled and he said, well, that is the nature of the Hare Krishna mantra. One who chants develops loving ecstasy for Krishna. So just keep chanting and go out and preach the value of the chanting. And so Mahaprabhu said, I firmly believe in these words of my spiritual master, and therefore I always chant the holy name of the Lord alone and in association. And, they were just captivated. The Mayavadi sannyasis were completely moved and captivated, and their minds were fully changed, and thus they spoke, with pleasing words. And they said, well, what you said is all true. Only one who's favored by fortune attains love of Godhead, and we don't really have any objection to your being a great devotee of Krishna, but, why do you avoid discussing Vedanta Sutra? And Mahaprabhu smiled again and, said, dear sirs, if you don't mind, I'll say something about Vedanta philosophy. I'll talk about Vedanta. You might not like it. And so the sannyasis, by this time they're so charmed, and they humbly addressed Mahaprabhu as Narayan himself, which he was. And they said, your words and bodily features are so pleasing. We feel, extraordinary satisfaction in seeing you. And we believe that your words will never be unreasonable. Therefore, you may speak, go ahead and speak on Vedanta Sutra. So just, to note that, he's won them over by his beauty, his effulgence, and his humility. And now he has their ears, and now he can explain anything. They are totally receptive. So Mahaprabhu, he gives an expert refutation, and he explains the difference. It's a long, this is a very deep section, but he explains the difference between the Lord and the living entity, and how the Lord is personal, and he has unlimited energies. And then he discusses Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana, which, basically these are the key points in any philosophical discussion. What is the current reality? Where do you want to go? And how do you get there? So, and then his final, of course, most important part is this emphasis on chanting the holy name. So this was, they were transformed. And this was a big, big deal in Varanasi. The transformation of Prakasananda Saraswati and his followers. He was a big person. Amazing. It's a very, very beautiful section of Chaitanya Charitamrita. But, there's so much to take away from it. We're just skimming through it, But seeing how Lord Chaitanya preaches. How did he preach? What did he emphasize? So he gives a wonderful example in this of how to present Gaudiya Vaishnavism to a learned audience. They're very learned people through purity of character, through humility, through philosophical intelligence. These three things are very, very powerful. And Lord Chaitanya, also Srila Prabhupada, he shows us how to dialogue with different types of communities. What are the philosophical points of emphasis? So this is all quite relevant for us, when engaging in philosophical discussions. A devotee, should shine. A devotee is naturally effulgent if he's pure in sadhana and character. And also that humility is really the jewel of a Vaishnava. Knowledge, it should not make us proud. And that honoring others, not as a show or pretending or as a, public relations stunt, but genuine, then, other people do have good qualities and they should be respected accordingly. So many things to learn, so many things from what Mahaprabhu did, how he did it. And now we've seen, a variety of ways that Mahaprabhu preached as encounters with different types of people. We see that in some, but in all instances, he was undefeatable in establishing the process of bhakti and the power of chanting the holy name everywhere to all varieties of people, even, trees, in a variety of ways. So, we see that sometimes he followed tradition and sometimes he was innovative and creative and out of the box. For example, he took Mayavad sannyas. That was a tradition. Whereas, taking the chanting to the streets, giving out the mantra freely, like making Haridas Thakur the Namacharya, that was very radical. And in ignoring caste considerations is a very big break from tradition. And it's interesting to see how different acharyas did this, innovate or follow tradition. It's all different with all of them. It's not, black and white or one way. Like Rupa and Sanatan didn't go into the Jagannath temple because, well, it wasn't tradition. They were considered fallen. And whereas Narottam Das Thakur, he was Kayasta and he initiated Brahmins and dacoits, So time and place, it's always, to be considered. Of course, Srila Prabhupada, he was just the master of innovation, without changing any essential philosophical points. For a preacher, there's always a tension between innovation and tradition, and it requires intelligence, sincerity, and Krishna consciousness. So, at this point, there's no structure to Gaudiya Vaishnavism. But what we can see clearly is that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was orchestrating everything for the eventual unfolding of it. He was like the maestro, the conductor of a grand orchestra, telling how each instrument should be played and when and how it should sound and how that would all play together. They would work together with all the other instruments to make a very beautiful composition. And not everyone was doing all the same thing. Everyone had different roles and put into different places, given different information. He was putting devotees in place to unfold his mission and giving each particular, a particular part to play and a particular seva. Like in Jaiva Dharma, Bhaktivinoda Thakur lists, exactly like what engagements were given to each devotee. Rupa was to do this, Sanatan, Lord Nityananda, even the next generation of devotees, what to do. So much what we can see is that he did a tremendous amount of delegating. I mean, basically, it's his main strategy was delegating. He knew what needed to be done, and he found the people to do it. So, we can take this away. It's very relevant that true leadership is to not do everything yourself. But, how much can one person do? Even the Supreme Lord took help, So by empowering others, so much more can be accomplished. And, Srila Prabhupada, he was the master of this. It's astonishing how he empowered young kids to just go out and do amazing things. He asked us to go to temples, open temples. And, I remember, Rukmini, she said, even the girls, yes, why not, And then, sometimes like Dayananda was explaining that in the first LA temple, Prabhupada arrived and then he said, so you'll give the lecture to Dayananda? It was like, no way. And Prabhupada, yeah, you will. And, so he empowered and he didn't micromanage at all. So what we see is that before Mahaprabhu went into his more internal, intimate pastimes in Puri, he built the entire framework and philosophical foundation on which his mission would be built. It's quite remarkable how he did so. He totally masterfully orchestrated a mission founded, the deepest, profound philosophical practices. Everything was orchestrated by him. And, as we can see, that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was a revolutionary. He wanted to create a revolution in consciousness all over the world. And he didn't come to establish yet another stifling, divisive, sectarian religious institution or to promote dry rituals, but rather he came to establish a living, vibrant spiritual experience for all living entities based on the chanting of the holy name. And of course, Srila Prabhupada so perfectly followed in this revolutionary spirit, in the way that he created innumerable ways to bring Mahaprabhu's mission to everyone through love feasts and drama and music and art and book distribution, puppet shows, life membership, opening ashrams to ladies, giving Brahmin initiation to Westerner, scientific preaching. Prabhupada was truly the top most innovative servant of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, following completely in his footsteps. So anyway, this has gone on way longer than probably I should have, but it's such an interesting topic. So we've covered a little about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's, his preaching style, his mood, his strategies, and, hopefully some of these points will inspire us to incorporate or to embrace some of them in our own service or outreach. Or at least, if nothing else, we are absolutely certain that even just meditating and hearing about these pastimes will help each of us to advance. In the words of Krishnadas, I will end with this. In the words of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he said, the more one hears the pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu with faith, analytically studying them, the more one attains the ecstatic riches of love of Godhead. And in another verse, Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes are all uncommon. Whoever listens to his activities becomes glorious, and his life becomes perfect. So, beautiful. Hare Krishna. We'll end there. Thank you.